yeah, so what we'll do is we'll recap, and then we'll cover the aspect of Christ's conversation with the Sadducees, and then if there's, any questions at any point during that, then we can try to address that. And if there's any more aspects related to that our sister sees fit to bring into the conversation, then we'll do that. So, I could recap, or is there anyone else that would like to recap what we discussed?
Kind of thought afterwards, as I thought back, through what we discussed, and kind of thought it would be those of us that are married now. It would be good that it kind of seems like that in this spirit and the character of the family, that they would like to keep families intact, that they wouldn't. So it kind of felt like that this connection with this Edenic level of marriage would be ideally suited, when the two, like spouses together, would go through the resurrection process together, right? So the creationary process, because it would be kind of an awkward situation, if one spouse went through the resurrection and the other one didn't.
Yeah, it'd certainly be wonderful if spouses could go through that together. Unfortunately, it's highly unlikely that will be the case in every instance, but we certainly pray that it is. So some of the things that I'll just kind of questions that would be good to contemplate, things like, is marriage eternal? Will there be marriage forever? Is a question. And if anyone would like to, if you guys could just kind of answer, maybe I'll throw a couple questions. These are just coming to my mind right now, just relative to what we were talking about this morning. So if I was to ask you all, if marriage will last forever, or if there will always be marriage, what is the answer to that?
I say yes.
Yes. Yeah, no, I would totally say yes. And, I would say what Hadif talked about, he was certainly saying that. And now I think we're getting some more of the evidence for that, which we'll look at a bit more as well, tonight.
So and it is the example of the Godhead, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we could further refine that. I guess if we're talking about the institution of marriage would be eternal. So the marriages that are formed on this earth then would be eternal togetherness. Huh?
Yeah, the way that Hadif talked about it, he said that if, both the husband and the wife live in harmony with the principles of the marriage as originally designed, then they will ensure its continuance now and forevermore. And if one or the other decides not to live in harmony with those principles, then it's ensuring its ruin now and, its non-existence in the life to come, at least as far as that particular marriage is concerned. So how about, is there a difference between biblical marriage and Edenic marriage?
Yes.
Yes.
Because we got a few examples of marriage, biblical marriage in the Bible, but it's not Edenic marriage.
Not what marriage, sorry?
I said we read a few examples about the rapist and different things. They're biblical marriage, but they're not God's original purpose.
Yeah.
Another question I was interested in is, will there be marriages in the kingdom or after we're in, we say heaven, but it's not, we're only going to be in heaven for 1,000 years.
You're talking specifically in the new earth.
Right, in the new earth. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and we'll look at that too and see some things relating to that. We'll kind of touch on that today. In what Hoddeth was talking about in the statement from 3 Symbolic Code, it's basically, you know, he was talking about the restoration, and he was talking about God's original purpose, and he quoted from Ellen White, and how she said that that was the perfect scenario, and that even in perfection, how Adam could not have that total happiness and satisfaction, even with communion with the angels and the rest of it, that even in that perfect state, that he couldn't have that without his spouse, right? So that's kind of starts off with that, and then he goes into explaining, you know, the restoration, and when he discusses the restoration, he discusses it in terms of the message of Elijah before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and then he quotes scriptures going all the way from the premillennial kingdom into the new earth, and shows the Sabbath and the new moons in the new earth and so on, and how, you know, that's the restoration. And if all that is restored, you know, how could it be that in that we would be caused to divorce our wives and so on?
So we couldn't be happy in the new earth without our other half.
Mm-hmm. Teresa, was there some stuff that you wanted to point out here as I call Esther?
Well, I didn't want to point it out. I wanted you to explain it.
Okay, she just sent me this thing about, I'll just read it quickly, and then we'll see what happens here. Yeah, in the Small Code, Volume 3, page 5, paragraph 2, it says, when the divine principles are recognized and obeyed in this relation, marriage is a blessing. It guards the purity and happiness of the race. It provides for man's social needs. It elevates the physical, the intellectual, and the moral nature. And then, let's see, could you list the principles, explain how it guards the purity and happiness of the race, and also how it elevates the physical, the intellectual, and the moral nature? That sounds like a whole study in itself, but it depends on how broadly and how narrowly you want to define the principles, right? You could just get to the root of it, and the principle is selfless love, which is the only love which is true love. And if you want to get to the heart of the issue, you know, that is the ruling principle in the kingdom of our heavenly family, aka the universe, and that's the principle of marriage. You know, that is the root of it, and if that principle is followed, every other facet or sub-principle that comes out from that will automatically be there. And it guards the purity and happiness of the race. It's almost self-explanatory, I think, as to how it guards the purity and happiness of the race. Because if everyone is operating off of selfless love, especially in a marriage relation, every marriage is a reflection of the image of our heavenly family. And if it is a marriage that is based off of the principles and the one true principle in all of its depths of our heavenly family, the true marriage, then that marriage will be preaching, just by living it, it will be preaching a true gospel to the children. And if those principles are not followed, then the children are receiving a false gospel by seeing a false image of our heavenly family. And so having that true image, it basically perpetuates the purity and happiness of marriage. And of course, in that provides the social needs of man and elevates the physical, the intellectual, and the moral nature. That, I guess, I don't know if examples would be the best way to explain that, but you have each of those aspects, the physical, the intellectual, and the moral, and if love is guiding all, love is very wise and guides to doing right things that benefit everyone in truth. Then also, let's see here. Okay, there's the question Hadaf mentioned there, that Sabbath and marriage were the only two institutions that were brought forth from the Garden of Eden. And the question is, does that mean that there were other institutions that weren't brought forth? And if there were, I guess we'll find out. If there are other institutions that did not make it past the gates of Eden, then we'll find out. I don't know what they would be, if there are any. So I don't know, Teresa, was there anything else in particular that you were thinking or wanted referenced in regards to the first aspects that you're talking about, as far as guarding the purity and happiness of the race, and elevating the physical, intellectual, and moral?
Yeah, that part where Ellen White said it elevates the physical, intellectual, and moral nature. It's not that I have to know necessarily, but it really caught my attention. I thought, okay, how does an Edenic marriage elevate the physical nature? Would that be in health as far as just our literal body's health, or does that have something to do with physical nature in regard to, the appropriate love interaction between a married couple rather than a marriage based on lust or something like that?
That had crossed my mind, but it is the broader picture of it, especially when you look at what she says about the opposite, right? Which it's easy enough to find if any of you just do a search through Ellen White's writings, about marriage, and if you type something about marriage and divorce, or marriage and, there's a number of searches that you could do where she talks about marriage. If you type marriage and perversion, or marriage and any of those things, you'll come up with a lot of stuff from Ellen White. And she talks about basically animal passions and false or incorrect, physical intimacy within the married relationship, and how detrimental that is. And so the opposite would certainly be true in terms of a marriage which is following the selfless love principle. And that's just one aspect, though, because there's the overall health of, if both people are serving each other with their physical needs as well as intellectual and moral, the overall health is just simply going to be better as a result of everything that comes out of that relationship. You know, so it is very broad, but yeah, of course, it has to do with, you know, all the other aspects as well, sexual relations included.
One thing that stood out to me about the intellectual nature part there is I remember back when, you know, we were just friends and just building a friendship even. One of the things that I said to you was how much I enjoyed having my brain stretched.
Right.
Because it was the first time in a long time I've really had my thoughts challenged and, you know, yeah. So I can see how an Edenic marriage would certainly broaden the intellect.
Oh, certainly, certainly, because, I mean, anyone knowing wisdom is going to broaden the intellect and elevate the intellect. And if you have two people together with that Edenic marriage, you know, they are just going to be for the edification of each other in all respects, including the intellectual. So, all right. I guess I'll do a quick recap and try to bring us kind of to where we left off. And that's all. I really appreciate all the things that you guys have been mentioning. That certainly helps to recap, and I'll spend less time on those points. But basically, you know, first, just starting from Hoddes's writings, we can see that he's teaching, or he was teaching, that marriage is something that was lost. The true marriage was lost, and it is something to be restored, and that it is an everlasting institution. And he pointed out, and this is just, you know, we didn't spend a lot of time on this, but it's worthy of mention again. He pointed out that if, you know, marriage weren't an everlasting institution, then why is the kingdom made up of both genders, right? And that has deep implications to it, because it would imply that we have gender for a reason, and we will continue to have gender for a reason. And so that gender isn't supposed to be a fruitless thing. There's no vain thing with our Heavenly Family. And basically what we found is that there are many forms of marriage that are biblical and they are according to the law, but they are not the Edenic marriage. It's actually a different marriage, right? And so the Edenic marriage, all these other marriages, those are two different things. And basically, you know, the restoration is of the Edenic marriage, of course. And what we kind of discussed closer to the end is morality, immorality, you know, what is transgression of the law and what is permitted by the law, and the differences there. And basically what we saw is that, you know, there are things that are lawful, right? And, you know, Paul makes a statement that all things are lawful, but not all things are expedient. And there's a principle there which is similar to the principle that we're discussing, because we are being called to a higher principle than simply what is allowed in the law. And so what we saw is that there are things that are allowed in the law that are immoral, right? And that there are, you know, for example, we saw that lawful biblical marriage does include polygamy. It includes a captor marrying a captive, whether lifelong or permanent. It includes permanent relations of a servant with his master-given wife. It includes the rapist and the victim. It includes, let's see here, I should have made a list of all this, which I can do at some point here. It includes the levirate marriage, which is the brother marrying the wife of his deceased brother. And, you have all of these things that are included as part of the book of marriage. And that is lawful, but it is not the same marriage as the original marriage. And many of the things included in those marriages are actually contrary to the original marriage, which makes them immoral. Because morality is based off of truth, and truth is synonymous with reality. And the original reality of any given thing is what determines what is moral or immoral in relation to it. And so what we saw, kind of another thing at the end is that we have things in lawful marriages, not even, in addition to the immorality in the lawful marriages of polygamy, rapists and victims, and the rest of the examples just mentioned, that there is a lot of immorality within heterosexual, monogamous marriages of today and over the centuries. And, anything that is not based off of those pure principles of love, anything that is not, as Doug would put it, safe sex, holy sex, it is an immorality, even though it takes place within a lawful marriage relationship. And there are a few things that, in Paul's writings which people use, and this I'm not planning to get into in detail at this point, but I just thought I'd mention it as a side note, and so we can understand the principle. There are a few things in Paul's writings which are greatly abused in relation to, heterosexual monogamous marriage. He talks about not refusing each other, and he talks about how nothing can defile the marriage bed, and so on. And some people, and he doesn't even quite say it like that, but that's how people take it. And it's really misunderstood to mean that marriage is just a license for sex. And you can read what Ellen White says about animal passions within the marriage relationship and lust and the rest of it. And so that's one principle. And then there's the other principle of not refusing each other except for, an agreed period of fasting and prayer and the rest of it. And that is often misunderstood to mean basically, and usually it happens with the husband, quote unquote, ruling over the wife and, basically demanding that a wife fulfill her scriptural obligation according to that verse. But if you take the verse in context and you consider it in the principles of the only safe sex is holy sex and the principles of the Edenic marriage, you can see that what Paul was really talking about, he would say not to refuse each other, and it's refusing each other of that love, But if someone is wanting something and it's not based off that pure principle of love, then, they're doing something that is immoral. And for someone to help their spouse do something immoral would be immoral in and of itself, right? So, we're called to a higher standard here. And, one way that we can know if what we're doing is based off of self or based off of pure love is if we're doing something that is based off of pure love, we won't be doing something that is against the desires and wishes of our spouse. You know, that's just a basic principle. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and considering them above yourself, right? So those are just some of the principles. And I just want to touch on those two things, the undefiled bed and not refusing each other in Paul's writings, because those are two things that are greatly misunderstood and abused. So anyways, kind of what we were coming to at the end of the discussion earlier is that, so we have these two different types of marriage, the Edenic marriage, and then these, you know, you could put it in a broad category of perverted or immoral marriages. And immoral marriages is probably a good way to put it, because it is simply not in harmony with the Edenic. And that's the standard since it's the original. So basically, we're going to go and look at this conversation between Christ and the Sadducees. And since we recognize now that there are two marriages, the Edenic and the immoral, the fact is, if one of those marriages is being addressed, it cannot be assumed that the other is included in the conversation. Does that make sense? In other words, if these are actually two different marriages, which I think the study earlier really showed that it is, then if one is being spoken of, it cannot be assumed that the other is being spoken of. So what we're going to do is look at the passages in which Christ was discussing things with the Sadducees. And the question that we're going to ask first is, are they discussing the Edenic marriage, or are they discussing the immoral marriage in, generally speaking, or in any of its various forms? And then once we find out which is under discussion, then we can understand that that is simply what's under discussion, and that the other cannot be assumed to be involved unless it is specified. And this shows up in three of the Gospels, the three synoptic Gospels, that's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I think we'll probably just read the version in Matthew and Luke. And the reason why is because the version in Matthew and Mark, I haven't compared it word for word, letter for letter, but it's either exactly the same or very, very much the same. However, there is a difference with the discussion as recorded in the Gospel of Luke. And the difference is certainly worthy of note. So first we're going to read Matthew 22, verses 23 to 33. And it says here, "The same day came to him the Sadducees, which say there is no resurrection, and asked him, saying, Master, Moses said, if a man die having no children, his brother shall marry his wife, and raise up seed unto his brother. Now there were with us 7 brethren, and the first, when he had married a wife, deceased, and having no issue, left his wife unto his brother. And likewise the second also, and the third unto the 7th. And last of all, the woman died also. Therefore, in the resurrection, whose wife shall she be of the 7? For they all had her. Jesus answered and said unto them, Ye do err, not knowing the Scriptures, nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. But as touching the resurrection of the dead, have ye not read that which was spoken unto you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And when the multitude heard this, they were astonished at his doctrine. So, based off of that, so far, is he talking, were they referring to, in their question, the Edenic marriage or an immoral marriage? Anyone can answer.
It'll be the immoral, what we were discussing earlier, that the Levite type marriage.
Certainly, yeah, and it's specific enough, and I mean we've talked about this passage before in regards to scripture canon, and it's important to keep that in context too, because the full context of the conversation is certainly important. So keep in mind, these Sadducees are coming to Christ. They don't believe in resurrection. It's obvious that they are trying to trap him in what he believes. So they don't believe in resurrection. They don't believe in angels. They don't believe in spirits, which again, a spirit is something which has life, everlasting life. So they don't believe in immortality, in immortal beings. And yeah, they only accept Moses. They don't accept the other writings. So we have this as kind of the framework, and they're coming and trying to trap Christ in what he believes. So keep that in mind. We're going to read the one in Luke, and I want you guys to notice if, the differences. And just let me know after you read this in Luke, what stands out to you as different. So this is Luke chapter 20, verses 27 to 37. It says, Then came to him certain of the Sadducees, which deny that there is any resurrection. And they asked him, saying, Master, Moses wrote unto us, If any man's brother die, having a wife, and he die without children, that his brother should take his wife, and raise up seed unto his brother. Now there were therefore 7 brethren, and the first took a wife, and died without children. The second took her to wife, and died childless. And the third took her, and in like manner the 7 also. And they left no children, and died. Last of all, the woman died also. Therefore, in the resurrection, whose wife of them is she? For 7 had her to wife. And Jesus answering said unto them, The children of this world marry, and are given in marriage. But they which shall be counted worthy to obtain that world and the resurrection from the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage. For they cannot die any more, for they are equal unto the angels, and are the children of God, being the children of the resurrection. Now that the dead are raised, even Moses shewed at the bush, when he called the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. For he is not a God of the dead, but of the living, for all live unto him. There's also the version in Mark, and there are a couple things that I'll mention. We won't read the whole passage, but in Mark, some of the different nuances, that you see in Mark, both in Matthew and Mark, he starts off by saying, do you not therefore err, or something along those lines, or you err greatly, or, he starts off by pointing out that their question is in error, and then he says, because you know not the scriptures, neither the power of God. Mark and Matthew recorded saying that, and Luke doesn't. Luke leaves out that part about you do err, you know not the scriptures, neither the power of God.